Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari has again warned that Boko Haram terrorists remain active in the country and continue to prey on soft targets. President Buhari made a remark at the 76th session of the United Nations General Assembly in New York last week, noting that although the terror group has been weakened, it remains active. He promised that Nigeria will continue to work closely with the United Nations counter-terrorism bodies in order to end the scourge. President Buhari also lamented that countries like Nigeria were using the bulk of their revenue servicing its external loans and called for an extension of debt repayment for developing countries still recovering from the COVID-19 pandemic. To discuss President Buhari's speech at the UN and the feedback that he got from the body's Secretary General Antonio Guterres, we are now being joined by Professor Bolaji Akinyemi, a political scientist and renowned expert on foreign relations. Professor Akinyemi was the Director General of the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs from 1975 to 1983 and Nigeria's Minister of External Affairs from 1985 to 1987. He will also fill us in on the just concluded German election. Good morning, Professor Bolaji Akinyemi, and thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Dr.
Good morning, Prof.
Abati. Good morning, Ms. Abiola.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Mr. Hosseini.
Morning, sir. Morning, sir.
Thank you for inviting me to join.
Prof, always a great pleasure to have you with us.
Always.
The United Nations 76th General Assembly has just been concluded. And one of the highlights for us here in Nigeria was a presentation by President Muhammadu Buhari when he spoke at the Assembly on Friday. We'd just like you to help us take a look at some of the submissions by President Muhammadu Buhari, particularly with regard to the security situation in Nigeria, global cooperation on key issues of terrorism and COVID-19, and it's a major point about debt cancellation for underprivileged low and middle income countries.
Thank you for that intro. I think actually the major piece in President Buhari's speech, which is going to be with us for probably quite a while, and I don't want it being swept under the rug, was his stepping away from what had been the usual Nigerian position on coups in Africa. Up until now, you could open your eyes when you hear that a coup had taken place and read out what would have been the position of Nigeria 50 years ago, condemnation of the coup. And you have been right. However, in that speech, President Buhari refrained from absolute condemnation of coups, but in fact condemned the behavior of African leaders that precipitate coups. He specifically criticized, if you like, coups against the Constitution by sitting presidents in terms of term elongation. Number one, this has been a position which some of us have taken for quite a while, that ECOWAS, the African Union, and the United Nations should condemn bad governance, term elongation, amendment of constitution, or you won't say engineering amendment of constitution to allow a sitting president to go for more than 2 terms, rather than a knee-jerk condemnation of coups that then overthrow governments that have, in a way, overthrown their own constitution. It struck me when he made that speech. And I think that should be welcomed to Nigerians, because it's an indication that the president will go in 2023. And we don't need to worry about any shenanigans about term elongation. It's also, because, I mean, in spite of all our problems, Nigeria is still the most powerful in ECOWAS. I think it's a signal also to that organization to be on alert when sitting presidents are undermining their own constitution. So I welcome that. I don't welcome two positions. Position one is on vaccine. And I think I said so on your program, I believe. I don't like Africans being put in this position of being victims. We seem to enjoy portraying ourselves as victims and asking to be rescued. Who told us to kill institutions that could have manufactured vaccinations in Africa? I remember a time when in Yaba in Nigeria, there was a vaccination manufacturing center which manufactured vaccinations not just for Nigeria, but for the whole of West Africa on yellow fever, I believe, and smallpox. We killed off that institution. And now we stand before the United Nations and accuse high-income countries of vaccine diplomacy or vaccine apartheid. But we have enough money to fund presidential planes, whether in South Africa, whether in Nigeria, or in fact, in any African country for that matter, who told us not to use our resources to prepare for this vaccination episode. Instead, we portray ourselves as victims. I would have liked a speech committing Nigeria to producing, maybe within the next 1 year or the next 2 years, producing vaccines, not just for COVID-19, but for all these epidemics that come our way from time to time. Number 3, I don't agree with that part of the speech asking for, well, what will you call it? I'm sorry, I've forgotten what Dr. Abate called it in his introduction. But what sounds to me like debt reschedulement or debt forgiveness or what have you. We are reckless, not only in the way in which we spend money that we make, we are also reckless in the way in which we spend loans that we get from abroad. And we then stand there and ask for debt reschedulement or what have you. Frankly, I think it's about time that the foreign countries punish us by refusing to give us loan. But I was listening to an analysis by an expert yesterday who said, in spite of the high, what to me, I'm not an economist, but what to me looks like a high debt ratio, that we still can service our debt, and that therefore there are still countries banging on our doors offering us loans, and that to that extent this is not a bad comment on our economy. But I'm not comfortable with that position, because we shouldn't really be in a position where, I mean, when was it, when Okojo-Iweala was our finance minister, that we got rid of all that debt, and now he's come back to live with us like an old curse on our economy. So these to me were things that struck me. The positions he took on terrorism, I expect it. The only thing is, I don't think we are on top of that issue. We cannot be. I mean, if you are a parent in Kaduna or you are a parent in Sokoto, or just yesterday, I understand that one of our barracks was overrun by these people. How is it possible to have that and then to talk about, that they are now, they are targeting soft, they are going in for soft targets. A military barrack is not a soft target. Yes, a school is a soft target. And to me, what I would like to see is, we are still we are still practicing this, what we inherited from the British. You serve 35 years and you are out.
Well,
But
Prof,
for God's sake,
Prof,
during the Civil War...
Prof, sorry to interrupt you here. We need to take a short break. And after that break, we'll come back to you. Please stay with us. We'll be right back. We'll just take this quick break. Welcome back to the morning show here on the Arise News channel. Our guest is still Professor Bolaji Akinyemi, political scientist and renowned expert on foreign relations. Professor Akinyemi, thank you for staying with us. Before we went on that break, you were talking about the British, and your last word then was about the Civil War. Please, if you may just continue from that point.
Well, okay, thank you. I was saying that we are still in the military practicing what we inherited from the British, which is you serve 35 years and you retire and you are put out to green pastures. But during the Civil War, Gowon called back even people who served during the Second World War. Now, given how stretched our army is now, from the northeast to the northwest, to the southeast, to the south-south, to the southwest, why are you still retiring people after 35 years? We need more boots on the ground, because if these people are so mobile that they can hit our barracks at different points, then in a way, the strategy of then rushing troops to wherever our own troops are being attacked is simply not what we should be doing. And I think we should stop this retiring of people after 35 years. Those who've been retired for the past 2 years, I think we should call them back. And I think this applies to the police as well. It's only then, when we stop attacks on our schools, churches, mosques, barracks, that we can then say that we are on top of this situation. Right now, honestly, I don't think we're on top of this situation. So maybe I better stop here and wait for those hard questions which Ms. Abiola takes delight in throwing at me.
Sir, you mentioned just now that you didn't agree with the president on the issue of debt. He called for an expansion of the debt service suspension initiative. But what is the significance of the fact that he prefaced that call with talking about combating illicit financial flows and saying that the whole world should join hands sort of in systemic reform recommended by the FACTI panel, Financial Accountability, Transparency, Integrity panel? Is that significant there?
It's better to act than to talk. We have $600 billion illicitly transferred out of Nigeria since independence. This thing has been mounting since independence, and frankly, nothing has been done about it. There has been no serious concerted effort to get this money back. Now, let me be clear about this. It is not just Nigerians who, through corrupt practices, are responsible for 600 billion illicit financial outflow. All those foreign companies operating in Nigeria are also complicit in the transfer of these funds. And what Nigerians don't often realize is if a foreign company allows you to take $100, be very clear in your mind that they've taken $500. And so it's both sides. And really, what I would like to see is as you are pursuing Nigerians, you should also be pursuing foreign companies. I'm sure there are laws abroad which will make a foreign company explain how all of a sudden is coming back from Nigeria with maybe $500,000 $500 million profit on a contract. It simply doesn't make sense. And they know this, but it is by far easier for them that it is us who should pursue our people. And I'm not saying we shouldn't pursue our people, but it ought to be done on both sides. If we are going to ask for debt relief or for ways and manner in which debt is being handled, we first of all have to make sure that that debt is not stolen, is not misapplied, that it is actually used for where it will generate funds for the country itself. For infrastructure, borrowing for infrastructure, I absolutely have, I have no, to me, there's nothing to criticize about that. But borrowing money in order to pay inflated salaries and allowances for the National Assembly is unquestionable.
I mean, so I want to talk, I have two questions. Number one would be, how about the hypocrisy of the foreign countries as regards this illicit financial flows? We all remember, you know, a certain Siemens back in the early 2000s in this country. And that same Siemens, yes, did funnel a lot of those money back in taxes to the German government. And the federal government is supposed to be having a deal with that same Siemens now, you know, for power generation and the likes. So, and the foreign countries do know about this. That's the hypocritical part. One. Two, will be, as regards the fight against terrorism, if we're not on top of it, when is the time for call for help? And because I remember, I think it was 2012 or 2014, Mali did call for help that led to something called Operation Sahel, you know, when the French brought in Raphael fighters to fight Islamic insurgents. And the French have stayed on with Britain and Estonia and a couple of other countries in what is called now Operation Bakaran. You know, that they're still fighting there and trying to mop up this insurgents. You know, when are we going to have sort of like that joint coalition task force? You know, somebody will have thought that we should have called for help at this point in time, because 10 years down the line, we're not winning.
Yes, you are quite right, Mr. Seni. We are not winning, but our attitude or our strategy in dealing with this has been bedeviled by our domestic politics. Dr. Abati can talk more about this than I can. But I served on the Boko Haram committee during the Jonathan administration. And believe me, well, thank goodness we never published that report. Because if we had published that report, Nigerians would have been alarmed at what we found out. Number one, of course, you must remember that there was a time one body called, Northeast Elders called on Jonathan to withdraw his troops from the Northeast, from Maiduguri, that, they were not needed to handle the Boko Haram. And you also recall that when the president declared the state of emergency in the Northeast, the second term, the National Assembly refused to approve that state of emergency. Of course, the president doesn't really need a state of emergency to deploy troops within Nigeria. But it is this lack of support for even the limited steps that the federal government wanted to take at that time. Now, the issue has blown up beyond all proportions. And, people are not really aware, even though it's been widely publicized abroad, that towards the tail end of the Jonathan administration, we did have foreign troops who were helping in the Northeast. And this was how Boko Haram was we were able to push back the Boko Haram and reclaim the local government areas that they had conquered. Now, as soon as this present government got into power, they cancelled that agreement with those foreign troops and asked them to go. They went, and of course, Boko Haram came back in full force. So I agree with you, but each time there has been this kind of suggestion you are making, pride from the military itself has surfaced. We can do this by ourselves. Or we need more weapons, or we need more resources, and what have you. For how many times are we going to call for maybe a task force that will really come up with a blueprint for dealing with terrorism in Nigeria and get the support of the political elite to the military elite itself, which will feel it is being challenged by calling for a task force that will come up with a blueprint. But as long as we take this attitude that we're on top of the situation when we are not, it's not going to help matters. Let me finally say one thing about the speech of the president, because I am aware that the quote-unquote minority caucus in the National Assembly had criticized this speech because the president has been accused of not telling the truth at the United Nations. No president goes to the United Nations to tell the truth by criticizing his country. None. I've been listening to speeches, presidential speeches, by all countries. From the time of Kennedy in 1961 up till now, Margaret Thatcher, Mitterrand, name them. You don't go to the UN and start criticizing your country or start exposing the weakness of your domestic policies. No country does that. And I didn't expect the president to do that. Normally, you will reserve that for when you give your National Day address or your budget speech, and then those can be criticized. Each country tries to put its best face or best feet forward at the United Nations.
Well, Prof, two quick things. The first is one of the other issues raised by President Buhari with regard to the reform of the UN system, and particularly the Security Council, and how to address the issue of representation by African countries. Will anybody listen? We've been on this for more than 15 years now. And every General Assembly, the issue comes up, but it dies there, more or less. And then the second part, do you think that, there was a dark side to Nigeria's participation at this year's hunger? And I refer in this regard to that protest by two groups of Nigerians. The group, the Million Man March, led by Professor Bolaji Akinyemi, involving Yoruba and Biafran and Middle Belt, activists and agitators. And then the pro-Buhari rally, the One Nigeria March, two different sets of Nigerians more or less heckling the president as he delivered his speech in the General Assembly.
Well, first of all, the issue about representation in the Security Council. Who blocks it? Has Africa agreed on who will represent Africa at the Security Council? Will it be Nigeria and Egypt, or Nigeria and South Africa? Nigeria cannot even reach a consensus among themselves as the two candidates to put forward. In Asia, will Pakistan agree that it should be India and Malaysia? Or will India agree that it should be Pakistan and Malaysia? So we have this problem amongst ourselves. Whenever you reach a consensus, the United Nations, in fact, the United Nations as a body has no position to take on this matter. It ratifies whatever consensus you bring to it. So really the fault is in ourselves, the members, regional members, and it has to do with the competition, the suspicion among themselves as to who should go forward, who will be conferred with that status, that gravitas of being the permanent member of the permanent member in the Security Council. And it's not going to be easy, because we've had a situation where Gambia has challenged Nigeria for a seat in the Security Council of the United Nations. Some have suggested that Gambia at that time was being sponsored by a European country to derail Nigeria. So you even have then external interventions in the regional politics of this issue. The other one is this makes hunger interesting for New Yorkers. When I was a student in the United States, it used to be fun, to watch these counter demonstrations, pro-Castro, anti-Castro, pro the Soviets, anti-Soviets. It's part of the shenanigans that goes on, part of the entertainment that goes on. The Israelis had it perfect. 6 months before Netanyahu used to come, they will rent Jewish crowds all the way from California. They will fill the gallery inside the General Assembly chambers. They will make sure that they surround the United Nations with their supporters. So any anti-Israeli rented crowd will have been kept maybe a mile off the UN. So I'm not surprised that Nigeria has now joined the group of nations that provokes both pro and anti. When I was a foreign minister, we didn't have this. Maybe because really IBB was not in the mood to attend the hunger sessions until very late in his administration. And number two, maybe because IBB administration was very popular. So I really didn't confront. I was the one who usually gave these annual speeches at that time. And we didn't confront, we were not confronted with administration, with demonstrations, whether for or against. But it's entertaining.
So quickly before we go, sir, what do you make of the events in Germany and the change there with Sunday's election heralding a new era for Germany. And, you know, the win so far, well, the results haven't been completely tallied now, of the Social Democrats over the CDU, the incumbent CDU. Briefly, sir, please.
Yes, I think it's something that I find welcoming. I mean, I am basically a social democrat at heart. And I think that a combination of the Greens and the Social Democrats will give Germany a position in Europe which was slightly different from the Merkel years, will reconfirm a position of authority and a position of leadership of Germany in Europe on the right questions, the environmental questions, the questions on debt, position towards the third world. Because I have found the position of the Social Democrats and the Greens rather pro-third world or pro-middle and low-income countries. I welcome, of course, I'm not a German, but I welcome the result of the elections so far.
Well, thank you very much, Prof. Thank you very much for joining us.